I don't need relics like you slowing the company down, she said with a smirk, tossing her glossy hair over her shoulder like she'd just completed a mundane task. It wasn't anger in her voice, more like casual disdain, the kind reserved for removing a piece of outdated machinery. That was the moment I knew she hadn't read a single line of my personnel file. My name is Stanley Rowe. I was 59 years old on the day I got fired, and for the past 18 years, I'd served as the operations manager at Harper Industrial Systems, located in the heart of Indianapolis. It was the kind of job that didn't earn headlines or applause. I wasn't one for grandstanding in meetings or pushing flashy innovations just for the sake of appearing modern. I was the man who made sure every gear turned smoothly, every system ran on time, and every piece of heavy-duty equipment rolled out with the same reliability our clients had trusted for decades. I didn't respond to Vanessa Harper's insult. No indignation, no fiery speech. I just gave her a crooked smile, dipped my head in a silent nod, and walked out of her glass-walled office. Her employees, once my team, watched from their desks, eyes flickering downward as I passed. Some of them had entered the company fresh out of high school. I'd mentored them, taught them how to handle high-pressure orders and fix bottlenecks before they even started. Now they couldn't look me in the eye. I packed my belongings with deliberate care, each photo frame and award tucked into a cardboard box. 18 years of loyalty reduced to a sad bundle of personal items. No one offered a handshake. No one spoke. It was as if my departure had been ordered in silence long before the formal meeting ever happened. The company I was walking away from had been built from the ground up by Charles Harper, Vanessa's father. 43 years earlier, he had started with nothing but a single lathe in his garage and a stubborn determination to succeed. He had transformed that humble beginning into a $30 million 0-cents manufacturing powerhouse. Charles didn't just hire me. He trusted me, promoted me, often relied on my judgment more than anyone else in the building. He once told me, "You're the one I trust not to take shortcuts, not even under pressure." That had meant something. Now, here was his daughter, 28, fresh from Miami with a shiny MBA, deciding to modernize the business. I knew what that meant. Out with the old, in with the unproven. To her, modernization wasn't about improving systems. It was about removing memory, wiping away the people who remembered what Harper once stood for. I walked out to my truck, my box in hand. It wasn't heavy, but the weight of it sat on my chest. Still, I felt a peculiar calm settle over me because there was one critical piece of information Vanessa had overlooked: the clause in my employment agreement, added nearly a decade ago at Charles's insistence. It protected me from exactly this kind of thoughtless firing. If I were let go, without documented cause, the company owed me 2 years' salary. Not one, 2. I set the box on the passenger seat, rested my hands on the steering wheel, and stared through the windshield at the shop floor. It looked the same as ever, machines humming, people moving. But something fundamental had shifted. The person who had quietly held it all together was walking away, and none of them knew what came next. But I did. When I first joined Harper Industrial, I didn't think I was getting a second chance. I thought I was just getting a job. I was 41 then, a laid-off floor supervisor from a crumbling auto plant and armed with nothing more than a hands-on resume and a 2-year mechanical engineering degree from a community college. Not much to boast about on paper. But Charles Harper didn't hire paper. He hired people. He had looked across his desk during our first meeting and said, "Machines don't build loyalty. Men with skill and sense do." And somehow, despite my graying hair and the scars on my hands from years of assembly line work, he'd seen value in me. Within 2 years, I was promoted to operations manager. I never once asked for a raise, never went after credit. I just made things work. And Charles noticed. We weren't friends in the traditional sense. We didn't fish on weekends or share beers after shifts. But what we had was stronger. It was mutual respect. During the years my wife Linda was fighting cancer, Charles never once made me beg for time off. He simply changed my schedule, lightened my load, and said, "My family comes first, Stanley." Oh, but when he started slowing down, health problems, mostly heart, it wasn't surprising that he turned to me. Keep it running, he'd said. Don't let it lose its soul. I took that seriously. I made decisions based on principle, not spreadsheets. I refused to outsource what we could do better ourselves. I turned down risky partnerships and pushed back when suppliers wanted to cut corners. But then Vanessa arrived. She breezed in after graduating from some fancy business program, all high heels and buzzwords, trailing the scent of a South Beach lifestyle. Words like synergy, agility, and disruption spilled from her mouth as if she were reciting the table of contents from a startup manual. And at first, I thought it was just youthful energy. Every company needs a little fresh blood. But soon I realized she wasn't interested in learning. She was interested in replacing. Charles would listen patiently in meetings as she pitched ideas that made no operational sense, outsourcing our custom hydraulic components to factories in Mexico, slashing quality assurance timelines in half, laying off the veteran machinist who knew every inch of our equipment. I'd see his jaw tighten. His fingers would drum lightly on the conference table, but he never called her out. Not once. She needs to fail a little, he told me one afternoon, leaning in my doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Some lessons don't come from books. He believed in her potential. I admired that, even when I didn't agree. Then came the day he told me he was stepping down. Doctor says I need to take it easy. Vanessa's ready. I've made her promise to keep the core team intact, but he couldn't meet my eyes when he said it. That was the first time I felt it in my gut. He wasn't confident. He was giving in. The next few weeks were quiet, but telling. Vanessa stopped attending floor walkthroughs. She started bringing in consultants from firms with names that sounded like investment banks. She moved Jennifer from head of quality control to an advisory role, sidelined Thomas, the best engineer I'd ever known, and held meetings with only her hand-picked team, most of whom had little hands-on experience. I knew then that she didn't understand what made Harper Industrial successful. She thought the machines built the business. But the machines only worked because of the people who maintained them, who knew their quirks and how to push their limits without breaking them. She was planning to replace a living system with a spreadsheet. And then she fired me. Not because I made a mistake, not because of any documented failing, just because I represented something she didn't value: history, consistency, memory. She didn't even check the file. Didn't know about the clause Charles had insisted on years ago to protect me from exactly this kind of arrogant maneuver. That clause wasn't just about money. It was about recognition. The morning after my dismissal, I sat in my kitchen, the same one Linda and I had remodeled the year before her diagnosis. The sun poured through the half-closed blinds, illuminating the contract spread across the table like a war map. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. Beside me sat Harold Preston, friend, neighbor, and longtime attorney. He had thick rimmed glasses, a rumbling voice, and a taste for legal skirmishes that leaned toward poetic justice. Did she even read this? Harold asked, tapping the highlighted clause in the middle of the page. I shook my head. She didn't ask for any review, just fired me and moved on, like it was a reorg note in her inbox. Harold chuckled, not with joy, but with recognition. He'd seen this kind of corporate overconfidence before. Well, she's just handed you a $320,000 0 cents gift, and unless they've got documented cause, real cause, you're entitled to every cent. He leaned back, folding his hands across his chest. 2 years of severance. You don't see that kind of clause every day. Charles must have trusted you. He wanted to make sure I couldn't be poached, I said, remembering the brief meeting over a decade ago when Charles first proposed it. We had a few competitors snooping around. He didn't want to risk me leaving without a fight. Smart man, Harold muttered. Not so much his daughter. Stared at the paragraph again. It wasn't even buried deep in the legalese. Section 12, paragraph 3. Plain language. Termination without documented cause, as defined in Appendix C, entitles the employee to severance compensation equal to 24 months of current salary. No ambiguity, no loopholes. Harold had already sent the official demand letter that morning. He was confident I was calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes after an earthquake. You're alive, but everything you knew is cracked. I stood by the window and looked out into the backyard. The old maple tree Linda and I planted years ago stood tall, its wide branches shading the garden beds. We'd nearly lost that tree, twice, once to lightning, once to disease. But we'd fought for it. grafted fresh bark, trimmed what was dying, and braced the limbs with wire until it could hold itself up again. That tree was still standing, and so was I. This wasn't just about getting what I was owed. It wasn't even about pride, at least not entirely. It was about protecting something I'd helped build. About showing that you can't erase people like their outdated code in a software upgrade. I picked up my phone and started making calls. Thomas Baldwin, Jennifer Wynn, others whose fates I suspected had mirrored mine. If Vanessa had decided to clean house, I wanted to know how many pillars she'd knocked down before the roof caved in. One by one, the pieces started to move. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the next chapter, and I wasn't walking away quietly. Thomas Baldwin didn't pick up on the first call. I figured he was still reeling from what had happened. He'd given Harper Machinery 12 years of his life, leading the engineering department with a kind of quiet brilliance. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His designs spoke for themselves, efficient, reliable, and often ahead of their time. He finally called me back about an hour later. "Stanley," he said, voice low and wary. "You too?" "Yeah," I replied. "Vanessa didn't waste time. She told me I was obsolete," he muttered. "Said she wanted engineers who could think in code, not components. Like being hands-on was a liability." I let out a dry laugh. She doesn't realize components still make the machines run. We talked for 20 minutes, mostly about the absurdity of it all, but also about what came next. He hadn't looked at his contract yet, but after I mentioned the severance clause in mine, he promised to pull his file and call Harold. "Don't rush into anything," I told him. "Take a breath. Let Harold take a look first." After Thomas, I called Jennifer. She answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said without greeting. "I saw your empty desk yesterday." Jennifer had been the backbone of the quality control lab for over 15 years. Precise, meticulous, and fiercely protective of her team. Her standards were legendary and intimidating to anyone who tried to cut corners. "She moved me out," she continued, said I was too rigid, too stuck in legacy processes. Legacy. Like that's a dirty word now. "She's playing a dangerous game," I said. "And it's not just us. You hear from anyone else?" "I've been texting a few people. Caleb from logistics. Irene is in vendor compliance. They're all rattled. None of them saw it coming. We agreed to keep talking, to quietly connect with anyone else who'd been pushed out. I wasn't forming a rebellion, at least not yet, but I wasn't letting this go either." By noon, I'd spoken with 6 former colleagues. The emotions varied: shock, anger, confusion, even fear. Many of them had families, mortgages, kids in college. They hadn't expected to be jobless overnight, and certainly not after decades of loyalty. The worst part? None of them had been given clear reasons, just vague phrases like new direction or streamlined operations. I told each one the same thing: read your contract, then call Harold. Don't sign anything yet. Most of them had never read their employment agreements beyond the first page. Now they were thumbing through them like sacred texts. That evening, I sat on my porch with a legal pad in my lap, scribbling names, timelines, and notes from each call. The pattern was emerging. Vanessa hadn't just made a few staffing changes. She deliberately targeted veteran employees. Every one of them over 50, and that wasn't just careless, it was dangerous, especially if it came to court. I took a breath and leaned back, letting the breeze cut through the heat of the day. The old Harper crew wasn't gone. They were just scattered. But something was forming again, quietly, beneath the surface. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. That night, after hours of phone calls and scribbled notes, I sat at my kitchen table in silence. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. I stared down at the legal pad filled with names, arrows, underlines, half strategy, half chaos. But it was a start. I knew one thing with certainty. Harper Machinery had just tossed out its backbone, and the cracks would come sooner than Vanessa realized. The next morning, I pulled out an old business card tucked into my wallet. It was slightly bent, the ink beginning to fade, but the name was clear. Douglas Clean, President, Precision Parts, Inc. Douglas had been courting me for years. Every time we met at trade expos or industry dinners, he'd ask, "Have you ever thought of jumping ship? We could use a guy like you." I'd always said no. Loyalty meant something back then. But now, loyalty had been thrown out like scrap metal. I called him just after 9 o'clock IM. He picked up on the second ring. "Stanley Rowe," he said, voice full of surprise. "Well, this is a call I didn't expect, but one I've hoped for." "Still interested in that conversation?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Are you available for lunch tomorrow?" "Make it breakfast." "I've got time now." We met the next day at a quiet diner near the interstate. The place smelled like bacon and coffee, the booths worn but clean. Douglas was exactly how I remembered him. Broad-shouldered, white-bearded, always in rolled-up sleeves like he might jump on a machine at any moment. We skipped the small talk. He listened carefully as I explained what had happened. Vanessa's sudden firing spree, the severance clause, the possible age discrimination pattern, the conversations I'd had with former Harper staff. When I finished, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "Sounds like Harper's heading toward a cliff and you're gathering the people who can build the bridge somewhere else." "That's the idea," I said. "I don't just want another job. I want to build something. Something that respects experience. Something built right." He nodded slowly. "I've got a property I've been sitting on. A converted warehouse on the east side. Good bones. Could house a small production line. And I know the people who could run it," I said. "Engineers, quality control, CNC programmers, people who built Harper's reputation and got tossed aside like yesterday's specs." Douglas grinned. "We could focus on what Harper's neglecting: custom, high-precision components. The niche stuff, small runs, high margins." "Exactly. Vanessa's trying to go mass market, but she's wrong. We can't compete with offshore pricing. We win on quality and specialty work." He leaned forward. "I like where this is going, but I want you to lead it." They gave me pause. "I'm not looking for a title, Douglas. You don't need one. Just build something solid. I'll back you financially. You make it operational." I didn't answer right away. My mind was already racing with floor layouts, equipment specs, and who I'd call first. The wheels were turning, and this time they were headed somewhere better. 3 days after I was let go, I found myself walking into a corporate office in downtown Indianapolis, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since Linda's memorial. I wasn't there to grieve this time. I was there to collect what I was owed, and maybe something more. Harold Preston walked beside me, carrying his old leather briefcase like a weapon. He didn't move quickly, but each step had the weight of a man who had outmaneuvered corporate legal departments for 40 years. We were greeted by a young receptionist who tried her best to sound professional despite clearly being nervous. "Ms. Harper and the company attorney are in conference room B," she said, gesturing toward the frosted glass door at the end of the hallway. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, a sleek tablet in front of her, a bottle of sparkling water unopened beside it. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. But her posture was pure resistance. To her left was a lawyer who couldn't have been more than 30. Sharp suit, neatly combed hair, and an expression that flickered between confidence and concern. Harold and I took our seats. He opened his briefcase and calmly placed a neatly tabbed copy of my employment contract in front of him. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Vanessa broke the silence. "This is ridiculous," she said dismissively. "We're restructuring. That's cause enough." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Not according to this contract. Termination without cause, as specifically defined in Appendix C, triggers severance equal to 24 months of salary. In Mr. Rowe's case, that's $320,000, 0 cents. Her lawyer, Justin, according to his nameplate, scanned the document with growing unease. "Appendix C outlines conditions that constitute cause," he said. "Documented performance issues, ethics violations, criminal behavior." Vanessa interrupted. "He was undermining my authority. That's insubordination." Harold leaned forward, unbothered. "Is there documentation? A written warning, a corrective action plan, any evidence showing a pattern of behavior?" Justin flipped through a folder thinner than it should have been. "Nothing." Vanessa's face grew tight. "Fine, we'll offer 6 months severance and move on." "Well, 24, Harold replied, calm as still water. "That's absurd," she snapped. "Take 6 or walk away with nothing." I looked her in the eye for the first time. You're playing poker with a hand you haven't looked at. She leaned forward. You think you're untouchable because of one clause? Now, I've got lawyers who'll tie this up for years. Held closed his briefcase slowly. That would be a mistake, not just legally, but reputationally. Because once discovery begins, we'll be examining all recent terminations, especially of staff over 50. That's a pattern. That's exposure. Justin's eyes widened, realizing what was at stake. You won't get hired anywhere else, Vanessa added sharply. You're 59. You've peaked. I almost replied, but then the door opened. Charles Harper stepped into the room, thinner than I remembered, leaning on a cane, but his eyes sharp. Everyone went silent. Vanessa, he said quietly. She bristled. We're in the middle of something, Dad. Now, he repeated, it wasn't a request. They stepped outside into the hallway, visible through the glass. I watched Charles speak firmly, not angrily. Vanessa crossed her arms, shook her head, and argued back. Then her posture changed, rigid, defeated. She stopped speaking and looked away. It returned after 5 minutes. Vanessa didn't meet my eyes. Charles nodded to Justin. Prepare the severance agreement as written in the contract. Now, he turned to me. I apologize, Stanley. This isn't how I wanted things to end. Nodded just once. We didn't need more than that. As Harold and I stood to leave, Vanessa finally looked at me. This isn't over, she said, low and cold. I'll be reviewing every vendor relationship. Does anyone hire you? They'll never work with Harper again. Charles flinched at that, but said nothing. I gave her a small smile. You're right about one thing, I said. It's not over. The severance payment landed in my account exactly 1 week later. $320,000, 0 cents, minus taxes. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, the moment felt hollow. Money could compensate for a broken agreement, but not for broken trust. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about something deeper. Preservation. Legacy. The idea that what we built together still mattered. So, I went back to work, not on an assembly line, but with a notepad and phone. Quietly, patiently, deliberately. My first call was to Thomas. We met at a diner halfway between our homes, a quiet place with chrome stools and paper menus. He looked tired, not just physically, but soul dead. He stirred his coffee, then finally spoke. Harold got me a year's severance, he said. Not bad. Not what you got, but better than nothing. Did they make you sign an NDA? He nodded. 5 years. I'm not allowed to talk about anything proprietary, which apparently includes my own design. I pushed a card across the table. Douglas's name on the front. Precision, parts. He's looking for a consultant. Someone who knows precision, hydraulics inside and out. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You trying to get me sued? Not if you stick to general knowledge, I said. Nothing proprietary, just smart engineering. He held the card between his fingers. This doesn't sound like you, Stanley. You're not the guy who stirs the pot. I'm not, I replied, but I am the guy who builds things that last. Vanessa's tearing down what we spent years creating. He leaned back, studying me. Are you already in? I'm heading up a new division. Custom components. Small batch, high midget stuff. The work Harper used to be proud of. He gave a slow, knowing smile. The kind of work Charles said was our future. Exactly. Vanessa's betting on mass production, but we can't compete with overseas labor. We win by being better, not cheaper. Thomas slid the card into his wallet. You get a name for this new venture? Cornerstone Precision, I said, build from the corners up. His idea. He nodded, then lifted his cup. To start over. To build right, I replied. Over the next few weeks, I made more calls, quiet conversations, cautious outreach. Some people were hesitant, worried about violating NDAs or burning bridges. Others were eager, starved for purpose after being discarded. Jason Wright, a gifted CNC programmer, Vanessa had underpaid and overworked, signed on within days. Irene from vendor compliance agreed to consult part-time. Even Jennifer, still inside Harper and biding her time until retirement, offered to keep me informed, quietly. Each conversation was a thread, and one by one, They began to weave into something solid. No slogans, no marketing plans, just the right people, the right skills, and the right vision. Douglas secured the warehouse, high ceilings, reinforced floors, plenty of room for specialized equipment. He handled the financials, I handled everything else. Staffing, layout, workflow design. It was the most energized I'd felt in years. This wasn't revenge. This was rebirth. We weren't stealing Harper's talent. We were reclaiming it, one phone call at a time. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Jennifer, still holding her post in Harper's quality control lab, started sending updates. Nothing formal, just texts and quiet calls after hours. She was careful, measured. She couldn't afford to lose her job with retirement just a few years away. But she also couldn't watch the company unravel in silence. The first warning was subtle, missed deadlines. Then it was batch inconsistencies. Then, one day, a photo appeared on my phone. A memo from internal operations. 3 of Harper's largest clients had filed complaints about product defects and delayed shipments. 2 of them were threatening to pull contracts unless something changed. Fast. But that's the only solution. Not better training, not improved oversight. She laid off more staff and brought in third-party contractors. Cheaper, unvetted, unproven. The kind of cost-cutting move that looks good on a balance sheet and terrible on a production floor. But that wasn't the worst of it. She's liquidating equipment, Jennifer said during a quiet call. The custom machines Charles ordered last year, gone. Sold at auction. I blinked, stunned. She sold the hydraulics line? Half of it already, the rest going next quarter. That's over $2 million in assets. At auction rates, she probably got 30 cents on the dollar, maybe less. I sat back, letting it sink in. Charles had invested in that line specifically for custom work, the very kind we were now preparing to do at Cornerstone Precision, and Vanessa was dumping it for cash. He's converting everything to standardized production, Jennifer said. Same part, bulk orders, no flexibility. She thinks she can compete with overseas manufacturers, I said bitterly. She's already doubling her own salary, Jennifer added. Slash budgets across departments. But executive bonuses are through the roof. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the wall in my office for a long time. This wasn't just poor leadership. It was deliberate dismantling. And then came the real kicker. I'd heard whispers that Vanessa was spending more and more time in Florida. A quick background check confirmed it. She'd recently purchased 2 condos in Miami under a shell company. One of them is in a luxury high-riser downtown. She was cashing out. Stripping Harper for parts and building her own exit ramp. I brought this to Thomas over lunch. He stared at the report, speechless. She's not running the company, she's raiding it. And Charles? I asked. He has no idea, Thomas said. He thinks she's modernizing. He doesn't see the rot. We sat in silence for a long moment, not just thinking of ourselves, but of the 100+ employees still left behind, people we'd trained, people who trusted the Harper name, people who didn't know their foundation was being sold out from beneath them. What are you going to do? Thomas asked eventually. I looked him in the eye. Build something better. And I meant it. 2 months after I was fired, I stood inside a dusty but spacious warehouse on the east side of Indianapolis. Light poured in through old skylights, scattering across the concrete floor where yellow lines once marked storage zones. It had once housed a parts distributor, then sat idle for nearly a year. Now, it would become something new. Cornerstone Precision. The name came from Thomas, of course. Build from the corners up, he'd said during a brainstorming session over black coffee and scratch paper. That's how you make something that lasts. And it fit. We weren't just another startup. We were rebuilding the principles that made places like Harper successful in the first place. Douglas Klein had been true to his word. He handled the investment, leased the building, secured initial capital, and negotiated supplier deals. But he didn't want to run things. I'm here to back people who know what they're doing, he told me. And then I'll step aside. I brought the blueprint. Thomas and I spent our evenings laying out production lines on graph paper, walking the empty floor with tape measures, and mapping how raw material would flow from the delivery dock to final assembly. Jason, our CNC programming wizard, joined us early, helping plan the digital side. He'd been one of the first to jump ship after Vanessa slashed his department's budget by 30% while doubling her own compensation. The first machines arrived a few weeks later, delivered by the very suppliers Vanessa had refused to pay on time. They remembered us, they trusted us, and they were more than happy to see familiar names ordering again. Irene came on part-time to reestablish vendor compliance systems. Jennifer, though still officially working at Harper, kept feeding us insights, procurement errors, missed audits, delays. The intel wasn't sabotage, it was survival. She couldn't leave yet, but she could make sure Harper's implosion didn't crush everyone with it. We started with one mission: precision, not volume. Custom hydraulic components, small batch runs, tight tolerances, high accountability. The kind of work Harper had once been proud of before Vanessa gutted it. The culture took shape quickly. There were no corner offices. Everyone, including me, worked in the same open floor plan. Problems were solved together. No memos, no gatekeeping, just conversations and craftsmanship. People who had been disrespected suddenly found themselves asked for their input. Workers who were once treated as overhead were now helping define process standards. The change wasn't just structural, it was personal. And it was working. Within weeks, we had our first prototype orders. Nothing huge, just test runs from clients Harper had once served. But they were curious. They'd heard about what was happening. Some of them had grown frustrated with Harper's delays and lapses in quality. Others just missed dealing with people who knew what they were doing. Douglas watched from the sidelines with quiet satisfaction. He didn't interfere, but when he saw the first finished units come off the line, flawless, on time, under budget, he said simply, "This is what industry's supposed to look like." I stood by the window one evening as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the newly installed machinery. Below, Jason was training 2 new hires. Thomas was fine-tuning a design. Irene was sorting compliance forms. Cornerstone Precision wasn't just a company. It was a statement, a promise that experience, when respected, could still outbuild arrogance. Just as Cornerstone Precision was finding its rhythm, Harper Machinery was losing its balance. Jennifer's updates were coming more frequently now. She never editorialized, just sent facts. Screenshots of internal memos, photos of abandoned workstations, notices from clients expressing dissatisfaction. It was a slow mission implosion, and I watched it unfold from a distance, not with glee, but with the solemnity of someone watching a house fire they once lived in. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from her. A redacted internal bulletin. Production delays had tripled in the last quarter. 3 major contracts were at risk, including one we had both worked on for over a decade. Quality control failures were no longer isolated incidents. They had become routine. The bulletin included a note from Harper's VP of Operations, a man Vanessa had hired from a logistics startup. It read like a corporate pep talk. "We are streamlining deliverables to better align with agile workflows." Translated, they were skipping steps. Jennifer's message followed. They're panicking. Later that week, Douglas and I sat down with the purchasing manager of Midwest Manufacturing, one of Harper's oldest clients. He looked exhausted. "We've been with Harper for 27 years, he said, thumbing through a folder of complaint records. "But in the past 6 months, missed specs, late shipments, parts that don't fit." I didn't gloat. I simply listened. "We hear you've got something new starting," he added. "Same people, same standards." "Better," I said. "No shortcuts, no fluff, just precision." He nodded. "We'll place a test order, see how it runs." It wasn't just them. 2 more clients contacted us within the week, asking about capabilities, timelines, and tooling specs. They weren't leaving Harper out of spite, they were leaving out of necessity. Meanwhile, more former Harper staff were reaching out. Caleb, who had run their logistics chain like clockwork for 15 years, showed up at Cornerstone with a clipboard full of process improvements. Amanda from finance volunteered to consult during her evenings. Even Rick, a shop floor lead who once said he'd retire at Harper, showed up one morning just to watch our team work. "They still don't have a maintenance protocol over there," he said. "I had to fix a press brake last week using zip ties and a prayer." We didn't have job titles or official departments yet, but we had momentum. Harper, on the other hand, had turnover. Jennifer sent me a chart showing resignations over the last 2 quarters. Nearly 40% of veteran staff had either quit or been terminated. The remaining workforce was a revolving door of contractors and new hires, none of whom had time to settle in before being pushed to meet impossible quotas. The saddest part? Charles didn't seem to know. The man who once walked every inch of the production floor now sat removed, relying on weekly summaries and sanitized reports. Vanessa had effectively walled him off from the reality unfolding under his name. That evening, I stood on the second-floor landing at Cornerstone, overlooking the floor. Machines moved in a steady rhythm. People collaborated, asked questions, and solved problems with confidence and pride. Jason walked a new hire through a software calibration, while Thomas sketched a fluid diagram with his ever-present pencil. It was working, but not just because of what we were building, because of what we remembered and what we refused to forget. My phone rang late one afternoon while I was reviewing equipment schedules. The caller ID lit up with a name I hadn't seen since the day of that corporate meeting, Charles Harper. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Charles? Stanley? He said, his voice gravelly and faint like it was coming from somewhere far deeper than just his chest. We need to talk. I closed the folder in front of me and leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. There was a long pause on the other end. More than hesitation, it felt like regret. Know what you're doing, he said finally. The new company, the people you've hired, the clients you've spoken to. I didn't respond. None of it was illegal, and certainly none of it was hidden. I'm not calling to ask you to stop, he continued. I'm calling to ask for your help. That stopped me cold. He sounded tired, not just physically, but worn out in the way a builder sounds when the house he built has started to rot, and he's the last to notice. Vanessa's been selling off assets, he admitted. Cutting corners. I suspected some of it, but the board's getting nervous now. Major clients are leaving. Quality is down. We had a product recall last month that never should have happened. I waited. She's moved production to third-party facilities, he added. Out of state. Some of them don't even meet spec. The board is pushing back now. They want to explore options. Why tell me this now? I asked. Because you're the only one who knows the whole operation, Charles said. You understand not just the machines, but the people, the rhythm of the place. I should have listened to you months ago. I see that now. I felt something shift in me. Recognition, perhaps? That even those who lead can be led astray. What exactly are you asking, Charles? I need you to come to my house. Tonight. 7. Bring Thomas if he's willing. The board wants to discuss what's salvageable and who might lead a transition if it comes to that. I looked around at Cornerstone, the polished concrete floor, the CNC station humming, the clean organization boards with our delivery timelines. It had all come together from nothing, powered by people Vanessa had thrown away. We were finally gaining traction, and now the past was calling again. I'll be there, I said, but I'm not promising anything. Fair enough. I heard relief in his voice. Subtle, but there. Before hanging up, he added, and Stanley. Yes. Thank you for still taking my calls. When I arrived at Charles's house that evening, Thomas was already there. We were ushered into a room full of familiar faces. Board members who had once sat through quarterly reviews I used to prepare, most of them now visibly concerned. Some looked ashamed. They didn't start with small talk. They started with one question. What would it take to fix this? And just like that, I realized the story of Harper Machinery wasn't over, but its next chapter would be written on our terms. 6 months after being fired, I stood once again inside the Harper Machinery conference room, the same room where I'd once been dismissed without ceremony. But this time, I wasn't a guest. I was part of the agenda. It was the quarterly all-hands meeting. Vanessa stood at the head of the table, flanked by her executive team, all under 35, all looking more uncomfortable than confident. A screen behind her displayed the latest figures. Revenue had dropped 37%. 2 long-term clients had walked. Employee satisfaction scores were in free fall. She blamed legacy inefficiencies and market disruptions. Her voice clipped, her tone defensive. I sat in the back, waiting quietly, exactly as the board had instructed. Let her speak. Let her explain. When she finally noticed me, her voice faltered. "What is he doing here?" she snapped, pointing. The room fell silent. Charles sat among the board members. He nodded calmly to the chairman, who stood. "Vanessa," the chairman said, "the board has reached a decision regarding leadership, effective immediately." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Mr. Rowe," the chairman continued, turning to me, "would you care to explain the new arrangement?" I stood slowly, calmly. I pulled a folder from my briefcase, the same one Harold had used during our severance negotiation. But today, the contents were very different. "Harper Machinery," I said evenly, "will merge with Cornerstone Precision, effective immediately." Gasps. A few people sat forward in their chairs. "The board has approved the acquisition. Harper's custom hydraulics division will be absorbed into Cornerstone. The remaining departments will continue to operate under new leadership." Vanessa laughed, sharp and incredulous. "You can't do this. I'm the majority shareholder." Charles stood, voice calm but firm. "No, you own 20%. I retain 51, and I voted in favor of the merger." She froze, her face drained of color. I slid the merger documents across the table. "Cornerstone will assume responsibility for specialized production. The rest of Harper will be stabilized under leadership selected by the board." At that moment, the door opened, and Thomas stepped inside dressed in clean workwear, a clipboard under his arm. He nodded to Vanessa. "I'll be heading operations." She looked at the papers, then at me, then at her father. "This is," she scotted, her voice shaking. "This is personal." "No," I said quietly. "This is business." She gritted her teeth. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure no one who works with you ever gets another contract. Any vendor tied to you is finished." Charles winced, but didn't respond. I simply said, "You've already made it very clear what you're willing to destroy. We're just here to rebuild what matters." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the merger documents, but she didn't speak again. 3 weeks later, the transition began. Employees from Harper's Custom Division started training under our systems at Cornerstone. Machines were relocated, contracts reassigned. Clients, cautiously at first, followed us. Charles remained on the board in an advisory role, but stepped back from day-to-day operations. He came by our new facility often, leaning on his cane, smiling at the activity, the hum of machines, the return of purpose. "Never thought I'd live to see this," he said one afternoon, watching Thomas walk a young technician through a new process. "A company that respects both roots and progress." I nodded. "It's not about going back. It's about going forward without forgetting how we got here." Vanessa left quietly, took a settlement, moved to Florida. No goodbyes, no apology. But in the silence she left behind, something better had room to grow. 1 year after the merger, I stood on the upper walkway of our newly expanded facility, once just a warehouse, now home to both Cornerstone Precision and Harper Custom Hydraulics, operating side by side like two chambers of one beating heart. Below me, the shop floor was alive. Jason was reviewing a new CNC simulation with a pair of fresh recruits, patiently explaining how tolerance windows affect hydraulic integrity. Jennifer, lab coat crisp, moved between testing stations with her usual quiet command. Thomas, as always, had a pencil behind one ear and a sketch pad in hand. He still preferred to draft ideas before putting them on screen. The sounds were familiar. The steady clack of presses, the low hum of machines, the controlled chaos of ideas turning into precision parts. But what filled the space now, what you could almost feel in the air, was pride. Douglas joined me, a coffee in hand, sleeves rolled up as usual. He glanced down at the production floor with a satisfied nod. "Quarterly numbers came in," he said, handing me a report. "Best in 5 years." I scanned the sheet. Margins up, retention steady, 3 new patents filed. The kind of data investors love, but more importantly, the kind that meant sustainability for our workers and clients alike. This is what we were meant to build, I said quietly. Douglas chuckled. When I backed this, I thought I was just funding a transition, but what you've done, it's more than a pivot. It's a course correction for the whole industry. I didn't respond. I just kept watching the team below. They were solving problems, collaborating without friction, moving as if guided by something stronger than policy. A shared purpose. Then my phone buzzed. Charles Harper. I excused myself and stepped into my office, answering on the first ring. Stanley, he said, his voice steadier these days. I just got off a call with Vanessa. That surprised me. I hadn't heard her name in months. She's started a consulting firm in Miami, he said. Corporate efficiency or something like that. Asked if I'd invest. I raised an eyebrow. Will you? I told her no, he said. Told her if she wanted my support, she'd have to come back to Indianapolis, spend a year working the floor, learn the business from the ground up. The way you did, the way we all did. And he hung up, Charles said, then after a pause, but she called back this morning, said she's thinking about it. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say, not yet. After the call, I stepped back out onto the floor. The team had just completed an order from Midwest Manufacturing, delivered ahead of schedule, 0 defects. The client had already submitted a reorder request. One of our youngest engineers fist bumped a technician who used to run Harper's now defunct line. 2 generations, 1 machine. That was the future I believed in. Not progress that erased the past, but progress that stood on it. Charles visited that afternoon. He moved slower than he used to, cane tapping the floor with each step. But his eyes were bright with something close to peace. He stood beside me as we watched the work unfold. He said, when I wrote that severance clause into your contract, I thought I was protecting an employee. You were, I said. He smiled. Turns out I was preserving the future. We stood in silence, both knowing the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but knowing, too, that the foundation was finally solid. That's how you build something that lasts.